Tim Gray had recently accepted an immigration case for a young child who had crossed over the border with her two sisters. Their father had been killed by the cartel because he owed them some money.
Our client was someone who was sentenced to life without parole as a juvenile.
This case involved the first and only female death row exoneree in the state of Mississippi.
There were three sisters and they crossed the border, and Tim had accepted the case for the youngest child, and we were working on getting her a special immigrant juvenile status. And in the meantime, while we were waiting on that application, we agreed to handle the case for the middle sister and the older sister. And so we applied for asylum for both of them. It was a different process for each because of their differing ages. So each sister had a different process to apply for asylum. So one sister went through an administrative process and had a more informal process. And then the older sister, we had a trial to determine whether she would get asylum.
He was convicted of or pled to a crime that he had committed while he was a minor. And as a minor, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without any possibility of being considered for release any time in his life. In our client's case, he was those factors that are legally required were considered, but he had asked for a jury to be the one to sentence him. So for community members to assess his life and his crime, and to make a determination for him of whether he should have been eligible for parole or not. The court decided not to allow the jury, and so the judge weighed the factors and ultimately sentenced him to life without parole. At the time, that was consistent with the law of Mississippi, but after he was sentenced, the Court of Appeals in the state actually decided that a juvenile was entitled to having a jury weigh those factors. Given that change in the law and the fact that he had requested a jury, we agreed to take his case to file a petition for post-conviction relief to have his particular circumstances considered by a jury to determine whether he should be sentenced to life with parole, with the possibility of parole, or life without parole.
She was initially imprisoned for killing her infant son. So I actually remember the trial from when I was growing up in the area, because it was about 20 minutes away from where I grew up. She didn't do it, was later exonerated, and however, we helped her with two particular issues that dealt with her son. The primary issue that we dealt with was that she wanted his death certificate amended, because the death certificate was the only state record that still stated on the record that it was a homicide and that he had been beaten to death, when in fact the bruising was related to improper and unknowledgeable CPR. We worked with her over the course of about a year to work with the Department of Health. Unfortunately, the way the law works in Mississippi is that the people who would have usually been able to make that change very quickly were no longer in a position where they could make that change. The state health officer was a different person. The coroner who was in the county was no longer in that position, and they had to be in that position in order to change an official state record. And so we actually had to file a petition, had to sue the state in effect to get them to do it. And they didn't fight us particularly hard, but they were not comfortable doing it without a court order. So we got that court order, got the death certificate amended, and were able to give that to our client. And that was the last record in the state of Mississippi that still essentially maintained her guilt.